Hey guys, my name is Anne, and I recently graduated from University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, where I studied cognitive science and complex systems. Today I will be sharing with you work done in collaboration with Dr. Andres Abeliuk and Dr. Emilio Ferrara at the University of Southern California's Information Science Institute last summer. This work is in part of the NSF-funded RIU program. As we spend more and more time online, our beliefs, attitudes, and preferences are increasingly shaped by those who we interact with online. So I think with this line of thought, we can categorize social media platforms into two categories. On one hand, you have platforms such as Snapchat and Facebook, where people predominantly are exposed to the information shared by their friends or families that they're connected to. On the other hand, you have platforms such as Reddit, where people essentially see the activities shared by all users of the platform. Um, I think a structurally similar platform is one in which a user sees the ranking of a list of items that is generated by all the users of the community. So for example, today's top hits on Spotify. So with this in mind, I think we can represent these different platforms as two different types of networks. On one hand, you have a locally connected network, and on the other hand, you have a highly or fully connected network. So then the question arises of how does a social network structure affect the preference diversity amongst its members? And here by preference diversity, we mean, does the group share very homogenous, similar tastes and beliefs and attitudes, or do they have a very diverse range of tastes, beliefs, and attitudes? So moving on to related works. First of all, social learning. So this is a cluster of literature looking at how the different social connections affect the way in which a group problem solves, both at the individual level and at the group level. So our study differs from theirs in that most of the literature tends to look at people problem solving things that have objective answers, such as the population of Sweden. In our study, we're interested in seeing how the social network structure affects the way individuals and groups form subjective preferences. Social norms. So this literature sort of looks at two things. On one hand, they look at how sort of group held beliefs are formed over time. And on the other hand, they look at how groups sort of create conventions in order to coordinate more efficiently. And our study differs from theirs in that these studies typically have, the participants have an incentive to conform, whether that is stemming from the fear of being ostracized or whether that is from monetary rewards given from the researchers. In our study, we're interested in seeing how homogeneity can arise even without the incentive to conform. Social information foraging. So this literature is heavily influenced by the social ecology field. So this is looking at the concept that organisms, including humans, form social connections in order to search for resources more efficiently. So our study incorporates this concept in that a person is more likely to investigate a resource or a source of information if it is highly valued or highly ranked amongst the person's social connections. And lastly, information cascades. So this is a group of literature looking at how one or a small set of information diffuses within a network. Our study differs from theirs in that we're interested in investigating how a large set of information can spread amongst within a network, and the sort of competition and dynamics amongst the different sources of information. So before diving into the model, I'm just gonna start out by giving sort of an intuition of how the model works. So this is Mary, and it's a Friday night, so Mary decides that she wants to see a movie. However, there's so many options and she doesn't really know which movie she wants to see. So she thinks back to her three friends that she's been talking to in last week and how they sort of were talking about the movies that they've seen lately and their opinions of the movie. So Mary then tallies up their opinions in her head, and then she finds that The Avengers has the most positive reviews. And so she decides to see The Avengers, and after seeing the movie, she decides that she likes the movie. And so this process forms the basis of the model. So with the model, you have a social network where the nodes represent the agents and the connections represent, the edges represent the social connections amongst the agents. And so, and you also have within the world a set of items where each item has a corresponding quality score that represents the probability that the item would be liked by any agent. And the quality score is uniformly distributed amongst all the items in the world. And so at the first time step of the model, each agent is given a random item to evaluate. And at each subsequent time step, each agent goes through a process that is equivalent to what Mary has gone through, where they aggregate the opinions of their neighbors and then they choose to evaluate the highest ranked item amongst its neighbors. And the process goes on until each agent has seen 10% of the items in the world. So we vary the model across a few different conditions. Across all conditions, there are 100 agents. So first of all, we vary the network structure. Aggregate is a fully connected network. Small world is one in which each agent is connected to 10 other agents, and we vary the p parameter from 0.001 to 1, and independent where there are no connections amongst the agents. We also vary the number of items in the world from 50 to 250 with an increment of 50. And for every number of items, each agent sees 10% of the items. So the two things that we're interested in investigating with this model is group opinion diversity and item popularity distribution. So for group opinion diversity, what we're interested in seeing is how similar members are amongst other members in the community. So to measure this, we first take a pair of agents and we count the number of items that they don't share in their list of liked items and their list of disliked items. And then we normalize these two numbers by dividing it by the number of trials, and we average these two numbers out in order to get the heterogeneity score of that pair of agents. We then calculate the heterogeneity score of all the pair of agents in the model, and then we average all those scores to produce the heterogeneity score of the model. For item popularity distribution, we're interested in seeing whether it's the case that all items are sort of equally liked amongst the community, or if it's the case that some items are disproportionately popular within amongst the agents. So to do this, we calculate the item popularity score for each item at the end of the model, where every time an agent likes an item, the score goes up by 1, and every time an agent dislikes an item, the score decreases by 1. And once we have the entire set of item popularity scores, we then take the Gini coefficient of the set of numbers, where the higher the Gini index is, the more skewed the distribution is. That is that it is more the case that one item is disproportionately popular compared to the other items. So moving on to results, first of all, group opinion diversity. So here the x-axis represents the number of items and the y-axis represents the heterogeneity score. So in this graph, you can see that the aggregate condition leads to the lowest heterogeneity score, followed by a social influence condition, and independent condition has the highest heterogeneity score. And you can also see that as the number of items increases, the heterogeneity score decreases, suggesting that adding more items in the world seems to not increase the diversity of the agents. Item popularity distribution. So here the x-axis is still the number of items and the y-axis is in this case the Gini index. So here you can see that the aggregate condition has the highest Gini index, followed by social influence condition, and independent condition has the lowest Gini index. And in this case, the more items there are in the world, the higher the Gini index. And here's another graph for the item popularity distribution, where in this case, the x-axis represents the rewiring probability. And here you can see that the less item there are in the world, the lower the Gini index is. So I think there are two main takeaways from this study. First of all is that homogeneity can arise even without the pressure to conform. And I think this model gives sort of one example of a mechanism through which that can happen. For example, that people are simply more likely to be exposed to information that their social connections like. The second takeaway is that I think the study allows us to more critically think about the connection between diversity and connectedness. So I think in the past few years, there's been a very strong initiative amongst different institutions and different organizations about bringing in a more diverse range of perspectives into the organization. And one common way of achieving that is through building a more strongly connected community where people can be exposed to others of different identities and backgrounds. However, as my study shows, there may be a tendency for highly connected communities to become more homogenous over time as a bubble forms where people are exposed to a similar set of information. So then I think this study sort of prompts us to think about how we can create communities that are highly connected, yet is able to sustain the diverse perspectives and identities of the individuals within the community. So future work, there are many different ways in which this model can be improved or extended. So first of all, probabilistic decision making. So in our model, it is deterministic that at every time step, an agent is gonna evaluate the number one most highly ranked item amongst its neighbors, but a more realistic model would be one in which the agent also has a probability of evaluating other items. Number two, different tie strengths. So in our model, all the neighbors of an agent share the same tie strength. In reality, a person may value the input or information of certain friends more than others, and a more realistic model would capture that. Scale-free network. So in our model, we decided to use the small world network as a representation of social media networks. However, another alternative would be to evaluate scale-free networks in which certain individuals have are much more highly connected than other individuals. And last but not least, gather empirical data. So in our model, there is no, our model does not incorporate any real world data. So a next step would be to gather real world data to validate the hypotheses of our model. And that is all for my presentation. Thank you so much for listening. And again, this work has been done in collaboration with Dr. Emilio Ferrara and Andres Abeliuk. And this project has been funded by DARPA, NSF, ISI, and USC Viterbi. Thank you.